Hello, my name is Michael Lambert. Today I made a joint recording with my very good friend Rob Groves from Truth to Power. We answered a number of questions and talked about a number of topics which members of our communities have very kindly sent in. And I'm very grateful for everybody who did write to us and ask us questions. And although we were unable to answer some of them, we did our best to answer as many as possible. And well, I hope you find it of interest. If you do and you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that would be much appreciated. And if you haven't already subscribed, I would appreciate it also very much indeed. So here is what happened. So, Rob, the first question I've got is from Jerry Trimble. And he says that the current crisis in Ukraine has thrown food security in Europe into question. Given that the current UK government seems intent on destruction of UK farming, will this crisis bring about a change in mindset in relation to us being more self-sufficient rather than relying on food from the other side of the world? Now, I think food security is something we should all be very concerned about because not only the loss of what Ukraine produces, which is huge quantities of corn and sunflower oil and all the rest of it. In addition, we're going to have two problems. One is that food suppliers in Europe, because it's now so much more difficult to supply to the UK, are probably going to give preference to their mainland suppliers, EU customers. And so, being that it's so difficult, a lot of people produce Spanish oranges and all the rest of it, and stuff from all over the EU are going to say, well, we'll not bother with the UK because it's just too difficult.
It's funny that we have got a sort of scarcity of land in the UK, and I always find it absolutely baffling that the government gives so much in subsidies to those big grouse moors and places up in Scotland. I mean, surely that land could be used more efficiently.
Yeah.
I'm also, as you know, Mike, I'm an avid golf player, I'm afraid, but sometimes you have to scratch your head and look at the amount of land we put by for golf courses, which, could be used, good fertile land that could be used to grow food. Question from Anthony Smith, Michael. How long do you think it will take for the UK to recover on the world stage? Our reputation is in tatters. I guess that applies to Brexit, maybe? Immigration, I'm not sure. But do you want to take that one?
Yes, I think our reputation on the world stage has been so badly damaged, and I think it's going to be almost impossible to recover. It certainly will take many, many decades. I think there are two or three reasons for this. I think, first of all, we have a Prime Minister who is a worldwide laughingstock, who is just seen as a clown, as an incompetent. And I think when you look at how he's managed Brexit and what a disaster Brexit is, and I think the whole world is looking on it and thinking we're absolutely mad leaving the EU. And I think it's been even shown up to be even more serious as a result of the war with the invasion of Ukraine and so on, whereby we've been very much standing on the sidelines. Despite the fact that I saw in the Evening Standard a headline yesterday. The Evening Standard, which is owned by Boris Johnson's very good friend, Yevgeny Lebedev. Lord Lebedev, yes. The headline was, Britain will lead the world against Russia. I mean, it's just delusional. It's just absolutely nonsensical. But I think the other thing which has really, really damaged our reputation worldwide is this handling of the Ukrainian refugees leaving, the women and children coming from Ukraine. The fact that we seem to have done everything possible to make it as difficult as possible.
Yes.
When the whole world has opened up and said, come here, don't worry about your documents, don't worry about this, that and the other, you can come. We have a Home Secretary who says we can't let them in just like that because some of these women and children, desperate women and children, left their husbands, left their homes, left their possessions, struggled across Europe. They can't come here without checks because they could be Russian spies, they could be terrorists. And she was saying to the Irish government last week, please don't let them go north because they could be drug smugglers. And funnily enough, the government doesn't speak for the country because the moment they open up and say, well, if you sponsor somebody, you can 130,000 people sign up right away.
Yes.
We're a decent nation. We're decent people. We want to help. Everybody wants to help. Well, you've got a Home Secretary and a government like this who are always worried about what the right wing of the Tory party think. And the right wing of the Tory party don't like foreigners, don't like immigrants, and don't want them coming here. You probably saw Edward Lee last week saying, we've done it, we've done enough. That has really, really damaged our reputation when other countries are doing so much and, without having to go through all this rigmarole and so on.
I just hope, Michael, that as it's, when I look at Russia, my feelings about Putin's government don't reflect my feelings towards the Russian population. I've met some really, really nice Russians in my life. I've worked with them. And I hope, to a certain extent, that in Europe and elsewhere in the world, that they can see that the British government does not represent the British people. And please don't judge us by our government. OK, you might say, well, we voted for them. But the fact is only a minority of the voting population voted this Conservative Party into office, even though they have a landslide majority in Parliament. They don't reflect the people. And as you say, they seem beholden by the COVID recovery group, European research group, extreme far-right libertarian wing of the Tory party. And they basically have to be dragged kicking and screaming to doing the right thing by your normal Tory voters who seem far more compassionate than the Tory government themselves. I've heard Tories saying as well, why is the media spending so much time looking at Partygate and hauling Johnson over the coals for what's basically just a few parties when he should be allowed to focus on Ukraine? But again, I think the rest of the world are looking at Boris Johnson and thinking, well, here's a man who can't even stop a party in his own flat. Yes. How the hell is he meant to stop a war in Ukraine? His credibility is shot. And I think a lot of the reputation of Britain hinges on the government. And the reputation of Britain will not recover until we get rid of this incompetent, corrupt, Russian colluding government.
Andrew Morehouse asks, do you think, this is following on from the previous question, do you think Partygate is dead and buried, with the war in Ukraine proving to be a useful distraction?
Yeah, I worry that that's correct. If the Sue Gray report or the Met Police report was to come out today, I think it's almost going to be sort of obscured by the ongoing war in Ukraine, where there's news every few minutes, basically. And I do agree with the thrust of this question. I think Boris Johnson, and I'm talking about this purely putting myself in Boris Johnson's shoes as a psychopath or at least somebody suffering from narcissistic personality disorder. It's all about him. He's been a very lucky boy because his incompetence and corruption were first of all obscured by COVID. And suddenly, as and I know we're nowhere near over COVID. In fact, I think a question we're dealing with later, we'll look at that very question. But, as soon as COVID lets up for a little while, the Ukraine war starts. And it always seems to me that something is covering not just Boris Johnson's incompetence and corruption, but also the fallout of Brexit as well, which, it's very difficult to pick apart the effects of Brexit from the effects of the pandemic and now the effects of the Ukraine war. The pro-Brexit lobby has always got something else to blame the effects of Brexit on. So 2 times over, Johnson's been such a lucky Prime Minister, but only lucky in terms of his own career, not in terms of the government. The government haven't been lucky with him by any means.
Well, I think his own career is all he cares about, really. But I think he's been lucky much more than 2 times. He was very lucky with when he was standing to be mayor, that he was up against Ken Livingstone, who was then being questioned about his anti-Semitism, and that all blew up, which was very fortunate for him then. And then he was lucky when he came to stand up against Jeremy Corbyn, who was clearly not very electable. He could have had a stronger opponent, in which case he might well not have won.
Yes.
I think he's just one of these people. I mean, you do meet these people sometimes who've got a lot of self-confidence, a lot of bluster, and they get through a lot of life through blustering, but also they tend to be lucky.
Yes.
But the thing about luck is that it can run out.
Yes.
And sure enough, I mean, I've been predicting the demise of Johnson for a very long time, but I mean, you can't just rely on your luck and bluster to get you through. And I suspect that there's going to be a lot coming out about these Russian connections, and some may be difficult to answer.
Yes.
And that may be his downfall. I mean, sooner or later he's going to trip up. As you say, again, luck for him. The invasion of Ukraine, of course, has masked everything. And frankly, by comparison, millions of people's lives being at risk compared with Partygate. I mean, there is no comparison in terms of which is important. No. Nonetheless, when it comes back to our own politics in due course and whether he continues, Partygate is very important because it's a question of honesty and
Yes, and it goes to the very character of the man, Michael, doesn't it? I mean,
Exactly.
the way he's disregarded the rules. I mean, today
Yep.
it's Partygate, tomorrow it's the war in Ukraine, but it's the same character behind the sorts of decisions he makes, which is all about what's best for Boris Johnson, not what's best. A complete disregard for what's good for the country, or any sense of duty or responsibility. Is he really the man you want as a wartime leader? The answer has got to be he's probably the worst prime minister at the worst possible time.
And he seems to take everything as a joke. It's all really for him a jolly jape. It's all fun. And as we said many times before, he likes going out to factories and dressing up. And he's off in Saudi Arabia today and so on, isn't he? And he likes going out and about and meeting people and making people laugh. And he doesn't really want to deal with the nitty-gritty of running the country. And when you look at the people he surrounded himself with, his cabinet, I mean, it's just frightening, really. Such a level of incompetence.
I don't know if you saw the photo. I think it's one of probably Liz Truss's photos last week with all the current Conservative female ministers, and I'm the first to really appreciate that the proportion of women in Parliament's been going up during my lifetime. Fantastic, but you look at that room full of mediocrity. They're not doing the cause of women any good in Parliament. This particular bunch, they're just mediocre, absolutely mediocre and incompetent.
When you've got Truss and Patel and you've got Nadine Dorries and Theresa Coffey in the cabinet, I mean, heaven help us, I mean, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You wouldn't get that lot to organise a raffle, leave alone run the country. I mean, it's terrifying. No. But of course, nobody's going to challenge, none of them is going to challenge Johnson.
No, that's right.
It's very sad to see how, since Brexit, Britain has no power or influence in policy or the future direction of the continent in which it sits. This war and the West's response has exposed that new reality for all to see.
Yeah, I thought it was very striking that certainly in the sort of precursors to the actual invasion, although I say invasion, people talk about it as though the invasion has been going on for 2 weeks. Of course, it started many years ago in the Donbass region and Crimea before that. But just taking the sort of media narrative as it is now, just before the current phase of the invasion, it was really interesting to see Chancellor Scholz of Germany and President Macron of France, rubbing shoulders with Putin, being involved in top-level meetings. And then with also the calls, I don't think there were any between Biden and Putin himself, but Biden was certainly talking to the senior people in the Russian cabinet. Yeah. But Johnson was just absent from that stage. And I thought, what a great symbol of post-Brexit Britain it was. It's really reduced our authority in the world, for sure.
Yes. I thought exactly the same. I thought under different circumstances, were we in the EU, Johnson almost certainly would have been one of those visiting in the Kremlin, and would have been very, very present and very much involved in discussions. For example, at Versailles last week, where the entire EU met to discuss the way forward.
Yes.
I mean, in the world now, there are just four powers, aren't there? There's America, there's the EU, there's Russia, and there's China.
Yes.
And where are we?
Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Cast adrift. Question here from Ron Punch. Should the Nationality and Borders Bill be suspended in the light of chaotic scenes facing Ukrainians in Calais?
Not necessarily in light of chaotic scenes facing Ukrainians in Calais, because there aren't any, really. What is happening is that they're getting to France, and then they're sent here, there, and all over the place, aren't they? One minute it's Lille, then it's Arras, and then it's Paris, and then it's go back to Brussels and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And I think what it needs really is some sort of compassion, some sort of look. We'll make it easy for you. Just make it easier and do away with all these restrictions, which I think they're probably trying to make a bit easier, but I'm not sure they're very good at it. I think, Rob, you probably know more about the Nationalities and Borders Bill than I do, so I don't really want to say a great deal. All I can say is that really, I just think we have to show some compassion for these really, really poor people and do anything we can, make whatever amendments to legislation to make their life easier, make it easier for them to come to the UK, providing they've got somewhere to go, which seems to be the most important thing as far as the government's concerned. But as I say, I think you probably know more about it than I do.
Yeah, I think the Nationality and Borders Bill as a piece of legislation was again, going back to a previous theme of ours, it was really a crowd pleaser for the extreme right wing of the Tory party, the COVID recovery group and the Libertarian group. It's a draconian piece of legislation that, if you remember, makes things like rescuing migrants at sea illegal and a raft of other draconian measures. Okay. Again, I do believe that even your average Tory voter has got far more compassion than what the Tory government realises they have. And the government's just out of step with even their own voters on issues of compassion, like in immigration, for refugees from a war-torn nation. I think Tory voters are certainly more compassionate than the government they voted for. And they always seem one step behind Priti Patel's Home Office as well. This piece of legislation was drafted. It's not really what even the Tory voters want. They want to see some compassion there. But my only concern, Michael, is that it only has become an issue when the refugees seem to be white European predominantly. I mean, where was the outcry about the Nationality and Borders Bill when it was Syrian refugees or refugees from Africa? And that really concerns me. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Fantastic, more compassion, please. But why should it be limited to white Europeans? Why isn't this an issue that applies to all races, all colours, all religions? Why is it just the Ukrainian situation where it's made people realise that actually this government is far to the right of the voting public? Anyway, that was a rhetorical question.
Now, I've got a question here of Mr. Scotch Pie. He says, I think there's only one topic, Johnson's closeness to Russia, especially now the whole Lebedev affair has blown up and is being covered by the Times and Byline Times. Is he compromised?
Well, my answer to that would be yes, and I don't think that the British public are yet aware of just how compromised Boris Johnson is. And to be fair, the Tory party in a wider sense. You've probably seen the list that's been published, I know, on social media quite regularly recently, showing a whole raft of donations that have been made to various Tory ministers. I think it's 14 of them have taken Russian money since the Tories came into power, and a number of MPs as well. Several dozen MPs of a Tory persuasion have taken Russian money. To be fair, there's also one or two Labour lords, I believe, that are directly associated with companies that themselves are directly associated with the Kremlin in Russia. So it is a sort of multi-party thing, but let's be honest, it's almost exclusively a Tory problem here. But Boris Johnson is the epitome of it. I mean, when you think his friendship with Yevgeny Lebedev preceded the Brexit referendum, and it's being said, it's just some research I'm doing for a future video right at the moment, Michael, and my research is by no means complete, I've only just started, but it's interesting that the famous fact that Boris Johnson wrote the two articles where he was arguing both for remaining in the EU and for leaving the EU. Apparently, between writing those two articles and the one proposing leaving the EU, that was actually published, between those two events, he actually met with his friend Lebedev. One could almost assume that conversation, that meeting with Lebedev, led to the choice of the pro-Brexit article being published. And I find, I'm looking into this at the moment, but that would be astounding if that were the case, because it speaks to the whole level of influence that Lebedev may have had. And let's not forget, Lebedev, it always seems like a reasonable guy to me. I've seen him on Question Time in the past, and I've read some of the articles he's written that all seem to be very neutral. But the fact is, he's the son of a KGB agent. People say, well, ex-KGB agent, but yes. Putin himself has said there's no such thing as an ex-KGB agent. They're either still in the KGB or, they've come off worse on a battle against Novichok. There is no such thing as an ex-KGB agent. The British intelligence services objected to Johnson's appointment of Lebedev to the House of Lords. Johnson then protested, fought his case, and the intelligence services then withdrew their objection. But, only after political pressure was put on them from Johnson. I think he's up to it in his neck, Michael.
I think so too. And it's probably out of weakness because he's only really interested in his own position and money. And I think there was this occasion when he went to a NATO meeting, didn't he? A rather important NATO meeting, and then went straight from there, having ditched his security people, and went straight to Lebedev's
villa in Italy,
in Italy, and had a drunken weekend there. Then turned up at the airport on his own, all looking rather dishevelled. A couple of days later, yeah. I mean, that's not really how you expect your prime ministers to be carrying on, and you don't know what compromat they've got. Someone like Lebedev Senior, I mean, I think he was at one of these parties, wasn't he?
Yes. Yeah.
Who knows what they've got, what they filmed secretly of Johnson once he's got drunk and he's having a good time at somebody's villa. I mean,
well, there is a hypothesis, and I've got no proof of this, it's just alleged, but that he was actually recruited by the KGB while he was at university. And if you just take that and say, I have got no proof of that, I've got no evidence, I'm not even stating it as a fact. But if you just assume that perhaps he was recruited by the KGB at university as an undergraduate, everything he's done since kind of makes sense. Brexit, the various incompetence and stupid decisions he's made, a lot of it just suddenly clicks into place.
I think it's extremely unlikely he was recruited when he was at university.
Sure.
I think that's so unlikely.
Yes,
and you can understand back in the days of Philby and Burgess and Maclean and so on, things were different then, and communism was much younger then and so on. So I think it's unlikely. I think he's been tempted by money, and I think he's probably been indiscreet somewhere, and someone's got some dope on him, and some information that he wouldn't want to be revealed. And
I agree. I think that's far more likely. But it's a delicious hypothesis, don't you think? I quite like it. But you're quite right. It's probably not correct at all. Very unlikely.
Well, who knows? We just don't know. But I think when the Prime Minister is giving such a bad example. Yes. And when he gets involved with, when there's so much Russian money about, and even the money they give to MPs. Once somebody comes along, a Russian is all very friendly and gives you £10,000 to the election campaign, you kind of owe him. he's got you in his pocket then, to a certain extent.
Of course you do.
And it's so extensive. And then you look at what's going on the sidelines with Farage and Banks and so on. The whole thing is absolutely stinks.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, and just as an aside to that, just thinking back to Wallpapergate, Michael, where Johnson will tart himself out just for a few grand. I'm nowhere near as wealthy as Boris Johnson, but there's no way I'd demean myself by going cap in hand to some rich person to pay my decorating bill. He's just shameless, isn't he? He'll do anything for money.
I believe he's famous for not putting his hand in his pocket at the bar, but that may be just a...
Yeah, no, I've heard that too.
Invented, but I can imagine it.
Next question is from Luke. How can trust be restored in politicians? The public have been sceptical about them since the Iraq War, and it's worsened with Boris, Brexit, and so on.
Yeah, I'm going to plug my forthcoming video about this very subject, because I think things are changing really, and as much as. Whereas once upon a time, half the population voted Labour and half voted Conservative, and it was always quite clear you just voted with the way you always voted, and there were a few changes in the middle and so on. But I think nowadays people vote for all sorts of reasons. People who are not interested in politics get to vote, and so you get things like as in the last election, you get a hugely charismatic, entertaining character like Johnson, who makes everybody laugh every time he's on the television, and people say, "Oh, I like him." They're not thinking about what he stands for or what policy he's standing for, and so on. And you people vote for slogans because it's all being reduced to slogans. In this social media world where everything is so quick and so on. Build back better. That sounds great. Levelling up sounds great, but it doesn't mean anything. So people are voting for these lightweight reasons, and I think that's a big problem. And I don't think we've got a proper democracy. It's all too lightweight and too, and you end up also with all these. Look at some of the politicians in Parliament at the moment. There are some wonderful people there, I'm sure, some terrific people. We all know there's some great characters there, but an awful lot of second-raters there.
Yes.
You look at the cabinet and some real second-raters.
Yeah.
And I think we can do better than that. I think democracy could serve us better than this, and I think there must be ways, which I want to discuss in my video, of doing this better. And I think the other thing I would say about this is that when we've got so much, when IT and technology is so advanced, when you see of how things have changed in the last 40, 50 years, everything is so advanced and so much information and so many fantastically powerful computers and algorithms and all the rest of it, and yet you've still got two tribes in the Houses of Parliament shouting across the room at each other. And the same way they've been doing for 200 years.
Yeah.
And in the end, what happens is the governing party is told by the Prime Minister how to vote. And that's how we make our laws.
It's pathetic. It's ridiculous. It's a broken
system.
It's anachronistic. It's like it's adversarial, isn't it? Across the bear pit.
Yes. It's good telly, but it just isn't the way to run her.
Yeah.
run a country.
Well, the vast majority of people voting in this country as well, they're voting for a constituents MP. That seat probably hasn't changed hands in decades in many, many cases.
Yes.
Some of the constituencies, one of the parties could put up a pumpkin or a thinly sliced piece of Battenberg cake or something, I don't know, and it would just be voted in.
Or a monkey in Hartlepool.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah. It's ridiculous. All the arguments for first past the post giving a decisive result, and where's it got us? As you say, it's just got us an adversarial house with all those ridiculous schoolboy noises, and something from 200 years ago, as you say. I've never lived in a constituency where I've voted for the winning MP, so I've never had any proper representation in Parliament, if you look at it that way. So things have got to change. And I know all the arguments against proportional representation, but as you say, I can't see any other alternative. I think what I would like to be seeing in terms of getting trust back in politicians, they've got to be more accountable. They've got to actually have some job insecurity. There's got to be some sort of performance-related assessment of them. Yes. And then the other thing is, the other way that you start trusting politicians again is to completely take money out of politics. And I know, again, it's not a popular policy that the taxpayer should be funding political parties. But again, I think that's the solution. There should be no second jobs. And then you hear all the right-wingers say, but you're discounting all the very able people that have got these high jobs. Why should we make them leave all this public experience they're getting? Well, I just say, look at the current situation. Look where it's got us. I want people that are dedicated to being members of Parliament, and that's what they do. That is their job. And if they'd rather be doing something else that makes more money, good luck to them. Go away. But I don't want you representing me. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. One, the voting system has got to change. Two, there has to be a 100% black and white, no second jobs. That's two solutions, I think, or two things that would help.
Certainly, I think something has to happen because it's just so out of date now, and so inefficient and incompetent, so wasteful, and individuals making decisions very often on the part of people who are backing them and supporting them and so on, and making decisions that are uninformed and so on, and so much money gets wasted, and so much incompetence.
Yeah, and the current system as well, we've touched on this a couple of times today, Michael, is that the current system gives people like the COVID recovery group of extreme right-wing libertarians in the Tory party, they've got complete sway over governmental decisions. Boris Johnson's scared stiff of his radical wing there, so that they have far more sway than they should do.
The right wing of the Conservative Party are the only people who can actually get rid of the Prime Minister, and right now, following the invasion of Ukraine, they're not likely to do that. Here's a question from Gerald Wagner, or maybe it's, given the subject, maybe it's Wagner. He says, what do you think about Germany rearming now as a consequence of Putin's war?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I heard that story. I won't pretend to be an expert on German defence policy at all, but I did hear that story, that they're rearming and also supplying arms to a third country for the first time since the Second World War. That's as much as I know about that particular facet of the question. But I do think it brings up a broader point, which is there's been a lot of good surprises about the Ukraine war. Now, that might sound a very strange thing for me to say, because it's been an absolute disaster, obviously, for the Ukrainian population and people, for stability in Europe. But one of the good surprises has been, I think, is how much the West, to use a generic term, has banded together and presented a united front against Putin. I'm sure Putin's been shocked, because you think of the lack of response to his land grab of Crimea, to the original invasion of Ukraine through mercenaries in Donbass and the east of Ukraine. I'm sure he's absolutely gobsmacked at the response, plus all the sanctions and all the rest of it. So the German the rearmament and the German decision to supply arms to a third country, I think is maybe just a microcosm of what's happening generally around the world. I'm sure it must have taken Putin back. What do you think?
As far as Germany rearming is concerned, I got no problem with that whatsoever, because it seems to me the chances of Germany invading anybody else are just about zero. I mean, why would they? And what possible circumstances could there be in the future where Germany would invade anybody unless they were invaded first? I never had any problem with a European army either. I think if there'd been a European army now, it wouldn't be a bad thing at all, or European military. I don't think that would be a bad thing. But it's all this question, is that we were all so neurotic about losing sovereignty and so on, and there might be a French general giving orders somewhere, and we should give the orders and so on.
I never understood what's so problematic about a French general as opposed to an American general, as we have under NATO. So, Michael, I had a question from Ethan Christopher Hartley, who says that infamously the government budgeted 20 billion for the track and trace system and then actually ended up budgeting a further 17 billion. That's a total of 37 billion in total. And I have heard it's likely to rise to 54 billion in time. Ethan says, do you think that we'll ever find out what happened with all that money, as it's a ridiculous sum, which I couldn't agree with more?
Yeah, I think it's doubtful we will find out in any detail what happened to it. It probably went to consultants, but although I think the 37 billion was budgeted, I think only 20 billion was actually spent. I say only 20 billion. It's just a staggering amount of money. But I suspect, no, we probably won't find out about it. And I think it's the same with the PPE scandals. I mean, you think of the millions and millions and millions that went off to friends of or people who knew Conservative ministers who'd got on the fast track and made all this money, and now driving around in Bentleys probably and buying second homes in Florida on the profits they made, and it'll never be investigated. And also, I think it's all forgotten. Everybody's forgotten about it. We've moved on from there. And I think it's terrible. I think it really is terrible that it is so much money, and it's our money, and it's just gone. And no, the whole test and trace thing was the most extraordinary farce. The fact that Dido Harding should be given such a vast budget to do a test and trace, which she admitted herself. I saw her interviewed sometime 6 months or more ago. And she's saying, well, it was never expected to work on its own. How much extra did she do to spend? Sorry?
I know I had an alternative sage saying it made no material difference to the progress of the pandemic.
They sent that thing to Mars, didn't they? That amazing thing they sent. They'd been working on for years and years and years. It cost $3 billion. That's 1/12, because they had 12 of those for the cost of a test and trace, which didn't really work.
And you look at this new national insurance increase that's going to disproportionately affect the less well-off members of society. I mean, people say, well, of course the cost of living's gone up without a pandemic, but it comes down to things like that. Billions of pounds on test and trace. Without that, would we even need to be increasing taxes? It's not all down to the pandemic. It's down to the government's response. Their pathetic, incompetent and corrupt response to the pandemic. That's why taxes are having to be increased.
Well, I'm surprised that more people aren't complaining about this or asking what happened to the money, because it is such a lot of money. I've said many times before, I think we probably spent more, budgeted more, this 37 billion, than every other country in the world on test and trace. When you look at other countries, like Germany, what was it? It wasn't even $1 billion. I don't think it was a few hundred million.
And they also offered, Germany offered us their system, of course, very early on, and we turned it down out of some thing about, we don't want Germany to be seen to be world-beating or leading the way, I guess. We need a good old British £37 billion track and trace system. It's just, I'm sure it's tied in with Brexit, Michael, that jingoistic nationalism fervour that gripped this country and still does to a certain extent. Final question for today. I'm afraid we're both got other things planned, so we're going to have to make this the last one today. Really big apologies to anybody who put in questions that Michael and I have not been able to take today. Hopefully those that have not had their questions selected this time, we can do them next time. Boxy001 asks, do Europe even want you back? The UK, that is. There's a bit of arrogance in the way British people talk about rejoining. They don't seem to consider at all that Europe might not want us back.
Yeah, I understand that. You do hear all the time about whether or not we should decide to join, or whether we should decide to go back into Europe. Well, if I was a European, I'm not too sure I'd want the noisy neighbours coming in, making a lot of trouble again. I mean, I would think the longer it goes on, the more they are getting used to life without us. And why would they particularly want us back? I mean, they're always very polite. You hear one political leader after another in the EU saying, we'd always like the UK to come back. But I don't know. We were awful troublemakers. Our hearts were never in it, really. No. And we were so aggressive and
demanding rebates and exceptions. And it's interesting, Michael, as well, the response to the Ukraine war. I mean, the EU response has just been almost impeccable, hasn't it? United and coordinated, and the literally millions of refugees that have been absorbed by the EU. You just wonder, would it have worked so well if the UK had still been in the EU? Because I've got a horrible feeling that Priti Patel, Boris Johnsonov and the rest of the gang would have been putting spanners in the works all over the place.
I don't know, Rob. I think the policy would have been a European EU policy in terms of how to deal with and I'm not sure within Europe whether or not country by country they're deciding on their policy, but I'd have thought it would have been quite difficult for us to be so difficult and to refuse to or to insist on so much difficulty and complications, obstacles to people being able to come here.
You're probably right that the UK wouldn't have had such a sway as to change what turned out to be EU policy, but I do think maybe it may have affected the unity that the EU presented to Russia as a response to the Ukraine. Maybe not. I don't know.
I suspect not. I suspect that we wouldn't have felt comfortable going against everybody else in the EU if we were still members. I think we would have had to have compromised and gone along with everybody else. And we always had a very strong voice in the EU, didn't we? We were always a big player, and I think we disagreed with almost nothing the entire time we were members. So yes, I think it would be much more harmonious response probably, whereas we stick out, unlike any other country in Europe, just about, which is sad.
Michael, as always, that's been great fun today. Really enjoyed talking to you as always, and let's hope we can do this again soon.
Yes, indeed, Rob. Thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed it very much, and yes, I hope we can do it again soon. That's if people are kind enough to watch it, and yeah.
Good point.